Hi. Proper functioning of ecosystem is essential for sustenance of life on Earth. There is a relationship between biodiversity and ecosystem function. In this video, I am going to talk about various hypotheses which is trying to define the nature of relationship between biodiversity and ecosystem function. The properly functioning ecosystem will provide economical and ecological values. The economical benefits of an ecosystem, properly functioning ecosystem including medicinal values, agricultural values and consumptive values. And the ecological advantages are the pure water, fresh air, fertile soil, climate control, etc. In order to get these economical and ecological values from the ecosystem, there should be a properly functioning and a healthy ecosystem. Properly functioning ecosystem should be in good size and shape, and it should be healthy so that it will be able to withstand any adverse changes. For a functional healthy ecosystem, what it needs is biodiversity. If a system has diversity in their genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. If a system has both three level of diversity, it should be functioning and healthy. And if there is a functioning and healthy ecosystem, we will have the economical and ecological values from that system. So the question is, how much biodiversity is needed? We humans always have the need for land, need for field for agriculture, and we have need for the all ecological products. So what how much biodiversity we should keep and how much we can destroy or we can use. So in this video I'm going to talk about various hypotheses which try to solve this problem. So one thing is sure, there is an effect, there is an impact of biodiversity in ecosystem health. If there is more biodiversity, it is proved that there is a healthy ecosystem and more functioning ecosystem. But the nature of relationship is very complicated and complex. So there are so many hypotheses which is trying to say the which what is the nature of the relationship between the biodiversity and the ecosystem function. And few of them are diversity stability hypothesis, Rivet hypothesis, redundancy hypothesis, keystone species hypothesis, idiosyncratic hypothesis. I'm going to talk about each of these hypotheses in detail. So firstly, we have diversity stability hypothesis. It basically says that if we have more biodiversity, the system will be more stable. And this graph represents the idea of diversity stability. The x-axis has the number of species, to say the number of species, not the number of individuals. Let's say if we have a forest or something like that, there are like 10,000 plants, or if you have a plantation with the same 10,000 plants, but the number of species may be different. If it is a forest, the out of this 10,000 we may find maybe 2,000 different species, but in a plantation, in out of this 10,000 plants there may be two or three species. So that's the difference between number of species and number of individuals. So this x-axis shows the number of species, uh, like how much number of species. It's actually the measure of biodiversity. And the y-axis is the ecosystem function. The ecosystem function can be identified in different using different parameters. Like it can be measured as the productivity of the community. How much productivity is the primary productivity? You must have already studied it in your ecology or environmental biotechnology. The productivity, primary productivity. That's a measure of ecosystem function, or we can say the stability of the community. If this community is more stable, the ecosystem is more functioning. If the community is less stable, it is not that much functioning. The primary productivity is same like that. If the primary productivity is high, the ecosystem is very well much functioning. So this graph basically show the relationship between the biodiversity and the ecosystem function, and it shows a linear relationship. The as the number of species increases, the ecosystem functioning is also increases. If the number of species is less, the ecosystem won't function that much. So, and I already told that ecosystem function can be measured either using the primary productivity of the area ecosystem or using the stability. And this hypothesis says that diversity stability hypothesis is actually linked the number of species with the stability of the community. So community stability is the ability of a community to defy change or rebound from a change. So the community stability is basically resistance and resilience of a community. So what is resistance? Resistance is like if some environmental calamities occurs or the new disease emerges. What is the ability of this community to resist that? Even in the presence of that adverse condition, the community is able to survive. That is resistance. So a stable community should be able to resist any changes. So it is very difficult to wipe out that community. If a if a community has less biodiversity, it is easy to wipe out. If an adverse situation occurs, it may disappear. The whole community may be disappear. So, a stable community should have resistance and resilience. The resilience is the ability to come back. If an adverse situation occurs, like a drought occurs, the most of the portion of the community has wiped out, but from the existing community, it is able to rebuild the community. Existing species, it is able to rebuild the community. So, the community stability is the resistance and resilience of a community. So, if we have more biodiversity, the community will be more resistant to adverse changes and it will become more resilient. So this relationship also shows that the number of species increases, the ecosystem function, the community stability, and the primary productivity. Everything increases. So the thing is that when we have more number of species, the the different type of species we have, it will be more efficient in using different resources. Like for example, in a forest, the in that different levels you can see the plants, like we have grass, shrubs, small trees and large trees. So it can effectively use the sunlight. So at the different kind in the levels, they are optimally or maximally utilizing the resources. So that's why it will become more resilient and resistant. So the first hypothesis goes like this, and here is a representation of the diversity stability hypothesis. Here we have like a rectangle that shows a community, and in the first one is a diverse community. In this you can see the blue and green dots. This is only blue only community, and this is green only community. Suppose it is less plants or something like that. It is not artificially cultivated, it is natural community. One thing you can notice, it's a average climate year. Here in the diverse community, the number of individuals corresponds to the productivity of the ecosystem. If we have more number of individuals, the ecosystem will be more productive and it is more efficient. Here you can see it is fully occupied. But in blue only community, somewhere the plant is not able to grow. The blue plant is not able to grow. It may be because of the difference in the soil condition or the irrigational issues like the water availability, something like that. Due to some reason, the blue is not able to grow. In some places, green also is like that. Somewhere it is not growing. So the number of individuals is high in diverse community because in some places, if the blue is not able to grow, green may be able to grow. So that's the average climate condition here. In the next, what happens is like that next year was a warm year. That means the average temperature was high, so it negatively affected the blue community and it is positively impacted the green community. So in the green you can see full growth, in blue the growth is less. But what happens to the diverse community? In the diverse community, the proportion changes. The number of blue decreases, but the at the same time number of green increases. So the overall productivity of the system was maintained at the same level. Here in the blue, the productivity was less. In the green, productivity was high. But it is as same as the diverse community. The next year was a cold year. The average temperature was less. So what happens? For the green, it is reduced. Blue, it is increased. But in the diverse community, it again balances. The number of individuals or the productivity was same, but the proportion of blue to green was changed. So it's basically when we have a diverse community, it actually stabilizes the ecosystem process. If one climate condition or the pest or something like that came, what happens is that it will adjust, it will automatically compensate for that. One species will complement the another. So the overall productivity of the ecosystem will be same. or the overall, like if it's a forest or something like that, if it gives the to take up the carbon dioxide, if one species of tree dies off, other species is there, so it is taking care of the thing. So that happens when we have a diverse community. So diverse community always stabilize the ecosystem process, so we will get a constant output from the ecosystem. And it has one other property of this diverse community is like it has a buffering capacity. So if it adapts to the changing environment, suppose we have three different species of plants, three, or we have the 10 different types of plants, types of trees. If a disease or pest came, it may be attacking one among these trees, but the rest of them are fine. Or maybe the pest is, or the virus is infecting, out of 10, 8 trees are infected, but the two of them will come back and produce, like regain the capacity of the community. So if it is a monoculture, we have only one type of tree. If a pest came and attack the tree, everything will be gone. So there is a buffering system. The buffering thing in the environment, if you have a diverse community, and such type of buffering is called the insurance hypothesis. Insurance hypothesis says that if we have different types of community, it actually guarantee the existence of the community. So even the presence of any devastating conditions or the unfavorable climates, some of them will survive and maintain the community. So that's just called the insurance hypothesis. So the next hypothesis is rivet hypothesis. Rivet hypothesis says that the ecosystem and species are like aeroplane and rivets. The rivet is this small metal bolt which is used for holding together different metal plates, and it is basically mostly seen in aeroplanes because aeroplanes are made up of aluminum. It is very difficult to weld and join metal plates in aluminum because it is more sensitive to heat. So in aeroplanes, if you take a close look, there are small dots there. The dots are actually these rivets which is used to hold together plates. And an aeroplane will be made up of millions of such dots. It is will be in everywhere in the body. You can see it's small dots everywhere. It's actually joining different plates, metal plates. The thing is that if one of them is lost, nothing is going to happen because there are millions of these rivets there. If suppose this one is lost, actually the nearby rivets will be take care of this one. It won't, the whole plate won't go away. So individual loss of an individual rivet is not going to alter the function or the it is not going to affect the functioning of the aeroplane. But if we lose many number of rivets, it may affect the function of the aeroplane. So the individual rivet is not that important, but if we lose a large number of rivets in a stretch, it may adversely affect the functioning of aeroplane. And the rivet hypothesis says that the aeroplane is the ecosystem and individual rivets are species, individual species. So if one species is extincted or it is lost from the community or eliminated from the community, there won't be any change in the ecosystem function. Ecosystem function as normal because the other species will take care of the function of that species. But if we lose many of the species, it may affect the functioning of the ecosystem. So individual loss of a species is not going to have a huge impact on the ecosystem function. We will get the ecosystem services even we lost few species. But if we lose a huge number of species, it is going to affect the functioning of the ecosystem. That's what the rivet hypothesis say. One other point is that some rivets are critical. Like rivets are used all over the aeroplanes. It is used to fix the seats, and it is used in the wings, and it is used in the aeroplane engine. If the rivets in the aeroplane engine is lost, it is more critical. It is going to, the plane may be going to crash. Same way, some rivets some species are more critical than other species. You have already learned about the keystone species. If a ordinary species or non-keystone species loss, it may not be affect the whole functioning of the ecosystem. But if a keystone species is lost from the community or eliminated from the community, it may affect the functioning of ecosystem very adversely. So graphically, the Rivet hypothesis is represented like this. Here is number of species, and it shows the in the y-axis we have the ecosystem functioning. So here you can see the number of species is decreasing, but actually increasing. If you go this way, it is decreasing. If the number of species decrease, nothing is happening to the functioning of the ecosystem. But when the number of species decrease in a certain point, it is quickly lose its function. Again, it will go to a plateau, again quick loss. So this is like what the Rivet hypothesis say. Here, the number of species is decreasing, but the ecosystem functioning is same. But when a large number of species is lost, then there is a sudden loss of function. Then again it will reach a plateau, again sudden loss of function. So this thing is seen when we are using pesticides. An excellent example is use of pesticides. In a field, if you are using the non-specific broad spectrum pesticide, what happens is that many species of the insects, the useful and beneficial and harmful insects will die. So that will be a huge loss. It's loss of many rivets at the same time. So that may affect the functioning of ecosystem, and it may adversely affect the agriculture. But if you are using a narrow spectrum pesticide, which affect only the harmful insects and in a more specific way, so it may not lead to the deterioration of the ecosystem because it is affected only a very small population. So that's what the Rivet hypothesis say. Nextly, we have the redundancy hypothesis. It is also called the passenger hypothesis. In the redundancy hypothesis, they are taking the metaphor of the aeroplane. In this case, it says that in the ecosystem is not like the aeroplane and the rivets. Actually, it is like aeroplane and passengers. So basically, in aeroplane, we have many. They usually have many passengers, and loss of one passengers. Like we are not talking about the economics of the aeroplane. How much is the aeroplane companies to gain? We are not going to talk about that. We are not talking about that. We are talking about whether the aeroplane is able to function, whether it is able to fly. That's the only thing. So, in an aeroplane, to fly, passengers are not essential. An aeroplane can fly without the passengers, but it cannot fly without a pilot. So, pilot is essential for an aeroplane, but passengers are not essential. Without the without the passengers also it can fly, but without a pilot it cannot fly even if passengers are there. So, the redundancy hypothesis say most species are more like passengers on an aeroplane. The species are redundant because the we can simply eliminate or replace it with another species without loss of function. If from an ecosystem, if you remove some of species, it is not going to affect the total functioning of ecosystem because the species are functionally redundant. That means the ecological function carried out by that species can be done by some other species. So they are functionally redundant. So removal of a species doesn't affect. But if you remove some critical species like keystone species, those are the pilots of the aeroplane, that is going to affect the functioning of the ecosystem. Okay, and this graph represents the redundancy hypothesis. It says that there is a strong saturating relationship between the number of species and ecosystem function, and in this place the species diversity is reducing this way, but the ecosystem services are ecosystem function and health is at the same level. That means that these ecosystem functions are compensated. The loss of one species is compensated by the existing species, and this compensation is at the functional level, like the functions carried out by the species. Maybe if the prevention of soil erosion, if you lost few species of tree, some other species will be taking up that role. So they are functionally redundant, and this helps to maintain system stability during disturbances. But if it goes like this, at some point we lose the old species which is carrying out the same function, and there will be a sudden decrease in the ecosystem functions. So up to that point, it's okay. You like the loss of biodiversity is not going to affect anything. So that's called the that's what the redundancy hypothesis say. Next, we have keystone species hypothesis. Keystone species hypothesis is somewhat similar to the redundant hypothesis. It says not all species are redundant. And its redundancy hypothesis says that the function of one species can be carried out by the another species. If we lose or eliminate few species from the ecosystem, nothing is going to happen because some other species will take up the same role in that ecosystem. But in keystone species hypothesis says that some species, the keystone species, they are not redundant. Their function cannot be carried out by some other species. So if the like ordinary species eliminated or extincted, nothing is going to happen, or it is not going to have a major impact on the ecosystem function. But if a keystone species is eliminated from an ecosystem, it is going to have a huge impact. That's what the keystone hypothesis says. So only the keystone species have the huge impact on the ecosystem. Other species is not having a huge impact on the ecosystem function. So it also say the biodiversity per se may not be critical to the functioning of the ecosystem, but the presence or absence of a keystone species is important. So the ecosystem function is not directly related to the biodiversity, but it is related to the number of keystone species or the abundance and diversity of keystone species. This is the graphical representation. Here we have this point. We lost the keystone species. If we lost this keystone species, the all of its activity is going to ecosystem function is going to deteriorate, and there will be sudden loss in the bio ecosystem functioning. And next we have idiosyncratic hypothesis. It says that changing the number of species influence ecosystem process, and definitely there is a relationship between the number of species in ecosystem and ecosystem function. But the direction of change may be positive or negative. Loss of some species may positively affect the ecosystem, but change in some other species may negatively affect the ecosystem. So the direction of change is unpredictable. Sometimes it is beneficial for the functioning, sometimes it is not beneficial, it is harmful for the functioning. So it is basically unpredictable. We cannot say the loss of gain of this much species is good, or loss of or extinction of this species is good or bad for the ecosystem functioning. So it says there is no obvious pattern between the biodiversity and the ecosystem function. So it goes like this. If some species, there is no, you cannot say any specific pattern between the number of species and ecosystem function. It's just like random. So that's why the idiosyncratic hypothesis say. We have some other hypothesis. I'm not going to talk about this hypothesis in details. First one is the null hypothesis. It says that there is no relationship between the biodiversity and ecosystem function. And inverse reward hypothesis, it says that an increase in biodiversity leads to the proportional decrease in the ecosystem function. Like just opposite to the reward hypothesis. It says that if the biodiversity is increased, the system function will be reduced. And another one is unique hypothesis. It says when a species is lost, a particular function of that ecological system is also largely eliminated. So it says that every individual species has a great role. If we lose one single species, it will have definitely have an effect on the ecosystem function, and it is basically negatively affect the ecosystem function. So far I have talked about different hypotheses which is trying to connect or trying to say a pattern between how the biodiversity and ecosystem function is related. And some of these hypotheses are contradictory in nature. Some hypotheses say, or most of the hypothesis says that biodiversity is good and it is going to increase the ecosystem function. But some of them say the opposite way. The biodiversity is not that good for the ecosystem function. And in some hypotheses, it is say only few species are important and other species are not that important for the ecosystem function. So at the end of the day, which one is correct? The question. Actually, I don't know the answer. Which one is correct? Maybe all of them are correct in special context. In one context, maybe one hypothesis is correct. In another context, the maybe the different hypothesis is correct. And the people have done several experiments to confirm which hypothesis is going to be the correct hypothesis. And it seems that there is no single hypothesis which can fit into all possible situations. But the basic thing is that biodiversity is good for ecosystem function. If there is biodiversity, the ecosystem function very well. And one further thing is that we know only about, at the maximum, we know only 90% of biodiversity. Like, we don't know about 90% of biodiversity. We actually know only about the 10% of biodiversity, maybe 1 to 10 percentage. About 90% of biodiversity is still unknown. So actually, we don't know what is going to happen if we lose a huge amount of biodiversity. So it's always better to protect biodiversity, and it is essential for the ecosystem function. And a properly functioning ecosystem is very much essential for the survival of human beings on Earth. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks.